We're now going to begin Mishnayot Shabbat, Perek Yud Aleph, chapter 11. Okay? And the first Mishnah says, Hazorek mireshut hayachid l'reshut harabim. If you throw something from a private place to a public place, mireshut harabim, from a public place, l'reshut hayachid, to a private place, chayav, you're guilty. Now you already know that you're not allowed to transfer an object from a private place to a public place, or a public place to a private place. But zorek, throwing, you may have thought that that's different. The answer is no. Public or private place may not be transferred either by throwing. Now, for those of you who watched the last video on the 4 types of places on Shabbat, you'll recognize some of these examples. Right here you have a private place, because it's minimum of 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim and minimum of 10 tfachim tall, and like a guard booth would be an example. And you can't throw from the guard booth to the road or from the road to the guard booth. Or, of course, any house as well would be qualified. Okay, here's some other private places: a city with walls around it, a courtyard with walls around the houses, even a pit, right, in the ground that's 4 by 4 tfachim square, 4 by 4 fists square, 10 tfachim deep, is considered a private place. Okay, and also a mound which is 10 tfachim high and 4 by 4 square, that would be a private place. Did you know a boat can be considered a private place, right? Because it's got a height of 10 tfachim tall and 4 by 4 tfachim square, right? You're not allowed to carry to or from the boat to another boat, or the sea, or the dock, etc. Okay? So, throwing or carrying, the Mishnah says it's the same. Here are makom pturim. These are exempt places. You can carry them, like a little cinder block, some thorns, a small mound, a small hole, that are minimum. Here is a carmelit. It's in between public and private. An ungated alleyway, a small mound, a little teeny garden with a small fence, not more than 10 tfachim tall, a little teeny ditch, right? Or your valley, or your mountain, or your sea. You can't carry there by decree of the rabbis. Now we're going to go into some pictures of the other 4 domains, some practical examples. Here's a great image here. We can see over here a person walking on a road. The road is a reshut harabim, a public place. How do you know that? Because it's a minimum of 16 amot, about 24 feet wide, which is the same size as the road used to transport the Mishkan in the desert. Here are different items which are patur, means you can take something onto them or take something off of them, like a block in the street, or some thorns, or a mound of earth, or a pit, or a box, a box or a hole in the earth. Those would be not guilty if you carry to or from them. These would be the carmelit, the in-between place that technically is not public or private because they're open, so it's not a private place. It's not public because public don't go in these areas, but the rabbis decreed you may not carry there. So examples would be like an alleyway, a dead-end alleyway with only access to houses, a mound in the street which is at least 4 tfachim wide but not more than 10 tfachim tall, and a pit which is less than 10 tfachim deep, a small fenced yard which the fence is not tall enough, like it's under 10 tfachim tall, so it's not considered a full private place, or a valley, sea, mountain, right? People could go there, but it's not necessarily so public. Okay, tefach, hand's breadth, by the way, is calculated using the 4 fingers of the hand. That's a tefach. Now the Mishnah in Mishnah Aleph continues with some more examples of throwing an object, and the same would apply to carrying as well. Okay, so Mereshut hayachid l'reshut hayachid, from a private place to another private place. So my house to your house. V'reshut harabim be'emtza, but to get there I threw it across the road, public place. Rabbi Akiva mechayev. Rabbi Akiva says you're guilty. You have to bring a sin offering. V'chachamim potrin. The chachamim say you're not guilty, but you still are not allowed to do that. Okay, so let's look what we're talking about. Here we go. So here we have. So here's some more examples. Here's a picture. Here you have a private house. It's got a fence around it, which is more than 10 tefachim tall. So the yard is also private. Okay, here's the road, which is more than 16 amot wide. Okay, this is actually a very good picture because it shows you, right, that in a road you can't carry on the road from here until here 4 amot on the road, approximately 12 feet on the road. What am I saying? 4 amot? No, 4 amot would be about 6 feet. My mistake. Because each amma is about 1.5 feet or 18 inches. Okay, makom patur to a carmelist is okay. Carmelist to a makom patur is okay. This area is the carmelist because it's off the road, but it's not fenced in by a fence, but it's like the side of the road. Okay? And now we see some more practical examples. So here's the example that our Mishnah was talking about. You have a guy in his house, he throws something from his door across the street into someone else's house. Okay? Rabbi Akiva says, okay, the Chachamim say you're not allowed to do it. Sorry, Rabbi Akiva says you are guilty of a sin offering. Chachamim say you're not guilty of a sin offering, but you should not be doing it. Notice that he's throwing it below 10 tfachim, below 10 fists in the ground. Now, why is that significant? Because above 10 tfachim, if you remember from the other video, is called a makom petur. So you're transferring it through a makom petur. That is not allowed, but definitely everybody would agree that you don't have to bring a sin offering because the makom petur is exempt. Okay? Now, they're talking about if you threw it lower than 10 tfachim across the road. Okay, now the Mishnah continues. Ketzad, what would be an example? Shtei gezustrot, 2 porches, zu keneged zu, one facing the other. Bereshut harabim, over the street. Hamoshit, if you pass an object, v'hazorek, and you throw an object, mezo lezo, from one to the other, patur, you will not be guilty for a sin offering, but you shouldn't do it. Okay? Examples, let's give a look. A guy has a broom, his friend says, hey buddy, can I borrow a broom? And they live on 2 balconies facing each other. He passes it over the street, and here's the street in the middle. You won't be guilty, but you shouldn't do that. Or he throws the object. Not guilty, you shouldn't do that, however. The Mishnah continues, what if both of those porches were on one side of the street? So here you have the street, here you have a building and different apartments, and Mr. Ruvain wants to lend his broom to Mr. Shimon, and he passes it from his apartment balcony to his friend's balcony, or throws it. The Mishnah says, Hamoshit chayiv, if you pass it, you're guilty. V'hazorek patur, however, throwing it, you're not guilty of a sin offering, even though you shouldn't be doing that. Now, why does that make sense? That is what the Leviim used to do in the desert when they took apart the Mishkan. There were 2 wagons, one in back of the other. Bereshut harabim, in the public place. Moshitin hakrashim mizol lezo. They would pass the beams from one to the other. Avalo zarkin, but they would not throw them. So let's give a look. Okay, here's the porch over here. This is what you may not do. If you do it, you have a sin offering. If you do this one, throwing, you don't have a sin offering. We still shouldn't do that. Why does that make sense? If you remember, if the porch was across the street, we said you for sure don't have a sin offering. So what's the difference if it's on the same side of the street? Explains the Mishnah, you have to know that this, passing an object from one porch to the other on the same side of the street, is pretty much exactly what the Levium used to do in the desert. And you can't do anything that they would do to build or take apart the Mishkan. What would they do? When they would ready to take apart the Mishkan or build the Mishkan, they would put their wagons on the side of the road. So here's the road. They would have 2 wagons on each side of the road, and they would pass the board. When they took the board down, they would pass it to wagon 1, and a Levi would take it, and the Levi would pass it in the wagon 2, and they would lay them down until they were all loaded up, and then they would load the first wagon. Okay, so if it's on the same side of the street, big no-no. That's exactly what the Levium did. If it's across the street, you still shouldn't do it, but you won't have to bring a sin offering. Another case where you won't have to bring a sin offering is throwing it from one porch to the other, because the Levium would definitely not be throwing the heavy beams one to the other. That might injure somebody. The Mishnah continues in Mishnah Bet. Cholyat habar, a hole of a pit. V'hasela, a rock. Shehin gevoyin asara, which are 10 fists high. V'rechavan arba, and they are 4 by 4 fists wide. Hanotel mehen, if you take something out of them. V'hanoten al gaban, or you put something on top of them or in them. Chayav, you're guilty, because it's like a private place. Pachot mikein, if it's less than this pator, it's not guilty. It's a makom pator. So we're dealing with over here a guy who's in the public street, and he wants to put an object inside of a pit. If that pit is 10 tfachim deep and 4 by 4 hands wide, it's a private place, and you will be guilty of a sin offering to transferring from public to private. Same thing with a rock, which is at least 10 tfachim high and 4 by 4 wide. Okay? What about Mishnah Gimel? Hazorek arba amot bekotel. If you throw an object in the public place 4 amot and it lands on a wall, doesn't land on the floor. So says the Mishnah, it depends how high it landed. L'mayla me'esar tfachim. If it landed above 10 tfachim, kizorek ba'avir. It's as if it landed in the air. Basically, it never landed, and you won't be guilty. L'mata me'esar tfachim. If it was below 10 tfachim, kizorek ba'aretz. It's like you threw it on the earth, and you would be guilty of a sin offering as if you threw 4 amot. So here's the guy, he's throwing an object in a public place, splat, it hits the wall, and it's a sticky object, it sticks. If it's below 10 tvachim, it's as if he threw it 4 amot in the public place, and you have to bring a sin offering. If it's above 10 tvachim, then he is not guilty because it's as if it landed in the air. Hazorek ba'aretz arba amot, if you threw an object 4 amot on the ground, chayav, you're guilty. Zarak letoch arba amot. What happens if you threw it less than 4 amot? V'nit galgel chutz arba amot, and it rolled outside of 4 amot. Then the Mishnah says, patur, you're not guilty of a sin offering, but you shouldn't do that. Chutz arba amot, but if you threw it outside of 4 amot, v'nit galgel letoch arba amot, and it rolled backwards within 4 amot, chayav, you are guilty. So what's that talking about? Let's give a look. These 2 situations. Here, guy number 1 threw an object. From here until here is 4 amot. He threw it less than 4 amot, but boing, 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 and it rolled outside of 4 amot, not guilty of a sin offering. This fellow, on the other hand, threw it outside of the 4 amot, but it rolled backwards within. He is guilty of a sin offering. Mishnah continues in Mishnah Dalet. Hazorek bayam arba amot. If you threw something 4 amot and you were in the sea, you threw it 4 amot in the sea, patur, you're not guilty of a sin offering. Why? Because the sea is a carmelit. Carmelit is forbidden midrabanan to carry. So the Rabbanan tell you can't do it, but if you did do it, you don't bring a sin offering, which is only for a sin midna Torah. Im haya rakakmayim. If there was a basically small puddle, water which is not not so high from the earth, basically. It's a little puddle of water. And it's a dirty puddle with mud in it or whatever. And it goes through the road. We've all seen puddles in the road. So what happens? If you throw an object 4 amot and it lands into that puddle, since the puddle is part of the street, chayav, you'll be guilty of a sin offering. How much does the depth of this puddle have to be considered part of the public place? If it's less than 10 tfachim, if it's more than 10 tfachim deep, it's no longer part of the public place. People will not walk through that, even if it's blocking the road. Okay, here's the example. Guy number 1 throws an object 4 amot in the sea, not guilty of a sin offering, but he shouldn't do it. Guy number 2 throws an object 4 amot in a public road, but lands in a puddle. He is guilty as long as the puddle is not 10 tfachim deep. Another case of the puddle, rakak mayim, a puddle, and the public road goes through it. If you throw an object 4 amot within the puddle, from one side of the road to the other, let's say, you're guilty because it's part of the public road. If you throw something from the sea to the dry land, from the dry land to the sea, from the sea to a boat, from a boat to the sea, from one boat to the other. In all these cases, patur. Why? Because you're dealing with a karmelit over here. So here you have this fellow throws it into the sea, or the guy in the sea throws it onto the land, or the guy in the boat throws it into the sea, or from the sea to the boat. He's throwing it basically from a public place to public or private to a karmelit, which he's not guilty of to bring a sin offering, but you should not be doing that. Okay, one boat, which is a private place, to another boat, through a karmelit, no sin offering, but you should not do that. Okay, now, we're going to see over here in the next example. Let's continue. Svinot. If 2 boats were tied one to the other, you can now carry, because it's considered one domain, from one to the other. If they're not tied, even if they're surrounded by some type of boundary, you cannot carry from one to the other. So here you have an example: 2 boats. If they're tied, you can carry one to the other. If they're not tied, no carrying from one to the other. What happens if you throw an object and after it left his hand, he remembered, oops, it's Shabbat today. Someone else caught it in the air. A dog caught it. Or it got burnt. In all of these cases, he hasn't completed the transfer of 4 amot before something happens that will make him not guilty. For example, right? He threw the object, but someone caught it. That person interrupted his throw. He did not actually put it down 4 amot. This guy did, or the dog did, or it got burnt, so it's destroyed. In those cases, he's not guilty of a sin offering. He shouldn't be doing that. Now, this part is a little difficult to figure out. Why should he be not guilty of a sin offering if he remembered that it was Shabbat while it was in the air? The answer is like this. We may have learned this earlier in the year. If someone cannot bring a sin offering if they did it on purpose. If you do, sin offering only makes you forgiven if you did it by accident. If you did something on purpose, you can't bring a sin offering for it. You can do tshuva, but sin offerings are only for things done by accident. So this guy over here, basically, he didn't do it totally by accident because he threw it, and while it was in the air, he remembers it was Shabbat. So before the act was completed, the rest of the flying of the object is on purpose. Now that's a little bit interesting because he can't really take it back once he's thrown it, but still we count it as not being by accident anymore. Okay? Zarak, if he threw it lasot chabura, if he threw it to hurt somebody, to make a wound, bein ba'adam, whether he did that on a person, bein b'behema, or an animal, v'niskar, and he remembered, ad shelo nasa chabura, before it made the wound, patur, he's not guilty of a sin offering. Again, it doesn't mean he didn't do something wrong, he has to do tshuva for making a wound on someone on Shabbat. But pater means he doesn't have to bring a sin offering. Mishnah Perek Yud Aleph ends off. Zeh haklal. This is the rule. Kol chayavei chata'ot. Anyone who's guilty of a sin offering, einan chayavin ad shetei tchilatan v'sofan shkaga. To bring a sin offering, the beginning of the act and the end of the act has to be by mistake. Tchilatan v'shkaga v'sofan zadon. If you started by mistake, but you completed the object on purpose, you knew it was wrong and you did it. Tchilatan zadon. If you started to do something wrong on purpose, and then you forgot v'sofan shkaga, and you ended up doing the rest of the act by mistake. Petorin, you are not guilty of a sin offering ad shtei tchilatan v'sofan shkaga, until you do the beginning and the end by mistake. Once again, I want to stress, doesn't mean you're allowed to do a sin on Shabbat if you did it by mistake or if you did it on purpose. It only means that you only bring a sin offering if you did it by mistake. If you did it on purpose, or in the half of it was on purpose, you have to do tshuva another way.